Picture yourself in steel-toed boots, hard hat secured, surrounded by the familiar sounds of construction. You and 5 colleagues have spent days building a modest railway station, and today marks the final push. The anticipation of heading home to loved ones fills the air as everyone prepares to wrap up another successful project. Then everything changes in an instant. A thunderous crack splits the afternoon silence. The station's main support beam buckles, sending the entire roof structure cascading sideways like dominoes. The building's framework groans and twists, pulling debris directly toward your work area. Despite desperate attempts to escape, you and 4 teammates find yourselves trapped beneath twisted metal and concrete, pinned helplessly across the railway tracks. Panic surges through your chest as you struggle against the weight holding you down. Your coworkers' anguished cries echo around you, some clearly injured, others simply terrified. Then an eerie quiet descends, broken only by a distant rumbling that makes your blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of an approaching train. Terror replaces pain in your colleagues' voices as they scream toward a control booth positioned roughly 40 yards behind your location. Inside that booth sits an operator who possesses the power to redirect the oncoming locomotive onto an alternate track with the simple press of a button. But there's a devastating complication. Your friend and fellow worker lies trapped on that secondary track. The operator witnesses everything unfold. Emergency services have been contacted, but rescue won't arrive in time. A choice must be made within seconds: activate the switch and sacrifice 1 life to save 5, or remain inactive and allow 5 deaths while sparing 1. As the train's vibration intensifies beneath you, your entire existence flashes through your mind. Every relationship, achievement, dream, and hope you've ever held dear. You desperately want to continue living, just as everyone around you does. The operator has 5 heartbeats to decide. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This scenario represents a variation of the renowned trolley problem, first introduced by philosopher Philippa Foot in 1967, and later refined by Judith Jarvis Thomson in 1976. What began as an academic thought experiment has evolved into one of the most discussed ethical dilemmas in modern philosophy, revealing the complex nature of moral decision-making and challenging our fundamental assumptions about right and wrong. Now imagine yourself as the operator in that control booth. What action would you take? Would you maintain your position as an observer, avoiding direct involvement but allowing 5 preventable deaths? Or would you actively intervene, essentially causing 1 person's death while preserving 5 others? Research consistently shows that approximately 90% of people claim they would activate the switch in this situation. The mathematics seems straightforward. 5 lives outweigh 1 life, and most individuals instinctively choose the option that minimizes overall harm. This reasoning aligns with utilitarianism, one of philosophy's most influential ethical frameworks. Developed during the 18th century, utilitarianism judges actions as morally correct when they produce the greatest possible good, maximizing happiness, pleasure, or well-being, while minimizing pain and suffering for the greatest number of people. However, those who oppose switching the track often subscribe to deontological ethics, which evaluates morality based on adherence to established rules and principles rather than consequences. From this perspective, the act of killing remains fundamentally wrong regardless of circumstances. Even if your inaction results in more deaths, actively causing someone's death violates an absolute moral principle. This raises profound questions about the distinction between allowing and causing harm. By observing the situation, understanding it completely, and possessing the ability to alter the outcome, are you already involved? Does a meaningful difference exist between observation with inaction versus observation with action? Consider this: choosing not to act is itself a choice that carries moral weight. No one can avoid making a decision when faced with such circumstances, and no one can truly opt out of situations they're already part of. The complexity deepens when we modify the scenario's parameters. What if 50 people occupied the main track, while 10 were on the alternative route? How about 5,000 versus 1,000? The proportions remain identical to the original dilemma, yet the emotional weight feels dramatically different when you're partially responsible for 1,000 deaths. even while saving 5,000 lives. What happens when we adjust the ratio? 5 people on the main track, 2 on the alternative, then 3, then 4. From a purely utilitarian standpoint, 4 deaths remain preferable to 5, making track switching the logical choice. Yet somewhere along this spectrum, the marginal benefit of saving 1 additional life begins to feel less significant than the psychological burden of direct intervention. How do we factor in your own potential trauma and suffering from making such a decision? Should your mental health be weighed against the mathematical difference of 1 human life? The dilemma becomes exponentially more challenging when personal relationships enter the equation. Imagine 5 people trapped on the main track and 1 on the alternative. But that single person is someone you deeply love, a family member, romantic partner, close friend, or child. Your instinct likely screams against switching tracks, which is entirely understandable from an emotional standpoint. But is it ethically correct? If you believed switching was right in the original scenario, the only variable that has changed is your emotional attachment to 1 individual. The fundamental moral calculus remains unchanged. Alternatively, if you originally opposed switching, place your loved one among the 5 people on the main track and reconsider the problem. Does your emotional investment justify compromising your ethical principles? Most people would prioritize their loved one, but this forces us to acknowledge that morality might be more flexible and emotion-driven than we'd like to admit. This connects to emotivism, a meta-ethical theory, suggesting that ethical statements don't express objective truths, but rather reflect our emotional states, shaped by cultural background, personal experiences, mood, and personality. If emotivism holds validity, what does this mean for ethical decision-making in general? Let's return to our railway setting with a crucial modification. 5 people remain trapped on the tracks with a train approaching, but this time there's no control booth, no switch, and no alternative track. You're simply a pedestrian observing from a nearby bridge. Standing beside you at the bridge's edge is an extremely large man, also watching the unfolding tragedy. You realize that pushing this person in front of the train would stop the locomotive in time, killing him but saving the 5 trapped workers. Do you push him? In the same surveys where 90% of respondents claimed they would operate a switch or lever, fewer than 10% said they would push the man from the bridge. Yet the outcome remains identical. 1 death prevents 5 deaths. The numbers are the same, your relationship to all parties is the same, and the moral mathematics should be the same. The obese man is no more involved in the situation than the person who would have been on the alternative track in our original scenario. Both would be perfectly safe if you weren't present to make a decision. Yet most people feel dramatically different about this version simply because it feels more personal and direct. You've been emotionally influenced enough to abandon what you previously considered logical and moral. For a final twist, imagine someone else stands on that bridge facing the same decision about pushing the large man. This person, however, is psychopathic and chooses their course of action based on a desire to personally participate in killing someone or to witness more deaths. Does their intention alter the morality of the situation? Would they be more or less moral than someone who chooses the opposite action? If the psychopath's decision results in what you believe is the most moral outcome from a utilitarian perspective, they would have technically done the more moral thing. But who would you prefer to be alone with in a room? Let's say they did choose the more moral action, but they remain an immoral person deserving condemnation. Now imagine that 6 weeks later, this individual visits a neurologist due to chronic headaches and discovers a brain tumor causing lesions in areas responsible for moral reasoning and value-based decision-making. The tumor directly caused behavioral changes beyond their control. How do we perceive them now? Are they morally responsible for their actions? What if instead of a tumor, this person experienced severe psychological and physical abuse as a child, directly leading to the behavioral patterns we observed? They had no more choice in this causation than they would have had with a brain tumor. Is there a meaningful difference? Is anyone truly morally responsible for who they become, and the choices they're led to make, if those choices stem from causes they never chose or controlled? The individual still requires intervention and potentially removal from society for rehabilitation, but the inability to remove a tumor doesn't make the person any less of a victim of circumstances beyond their control. The trolley problem transcends amusing thought experiments and internet memes. These scenarios illuminate how our sense of right and wrong often depends on far more than rational evaluation of costs and benefits. They reveal that decisions and actions frequently result from complex arrays of intentions and beliefs, all orchestrated by backstories of cause and effect within chaotic systems containing incalculable variables. The purpose of these questions isn't to trick our minds, but to demonstrate the incredible complexity and ambiguity inherent in ethical decision-making. We're currently entering unprecedented realms of moral understanding and societal conditions. What rights should we extend to our animal relatives? How should we program artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, and other technologies to make independent decisions about scenarios like whether a self-driving car should strike one person to avoid hitting five? How do we choose when all available options are harmful? How should we update legal systems, justice frameworks, and punishment structures as we venture into these new territories of understanding and social organization? As philosopher Peter Singer observed, what one generation finds ridiculous, the next accepts, and the third shudders when looking back at what the first accomplished. It quote, "It's both remarkable and an incredible achievement that we've progressed as far as we have as a society and species in understanding and agreeing at scale. What it means to attempt moral behavior and to do our best daily to act accordingly, upholding peace, order, reason, and understanding. Certainly, chaos, disdain, and misalignment persist throughout our world. Immorality lurks in every moment and historical stage. But there's also tremendous compassion, kindness, and genuine desire to treat others and our environment correctly to the best of our abilities. We've traveled an extraordinary distance, and we must never forget this progress. Yet we still have much farther to go, and we must never forget that either." The trolley problem ultimately teaches us that moral clarity often proves elusive, that good intentions can lead to harmful outcomes, and that the weight of choice, whether action or inaction, rests heavily on anyone who finds themselves at the switch. In our increasingly complex world, these lessons become more relevant than ever as we navigate new ethical territories with ancient moral intuitions. Perhaps the most important insight from these thought experiments is not which choice is correct, but rather the recognition that moral decision-making requires careful consideration of multiple perspectives, acknowledgement of our emotional biases, and humility about the limits of our ethical frameworks. As we face real-world trolley problems in technology, medicine, politics, and daily life, this understanding becomes not just philosophically interesting, but practically essential for building a more thoughtful and compassionate society. The train is always coming. The question is not whether we'll face these choices, but whether we'll be prepared to make them with wisdom, empathy, and moral courage when the moment arrives.